Good morning, everyone. Morning and welcome. We have a special service today. Glad you're here. My name is Joe Pierce. I have the honor to be the worship associate today. We welcome you here to our worship service. We celebrate here each week, mindful of the principles of our free faith. I'd like to say a little bit about what Unitarian Universalism is. These words are from Andrea Lerner. Our faith is not interested in saving your soul. We're here to help you unfold the awesome soul that you already have. Although we practice a free faith, it's one that requires responsibility. We have a church covenant, which we read and recite together each week, and it reminds us of our closely held values. The mission of our church is we learn, we lead, and we love. Announcements. I would like to draw your attention to the order of service. There's some announcements within. I only received one extra announcement of some grave concern. Our dear Barbara Brody has been hospitalized with seizures, and she was in the ICU, but I understand now that she's being released to a less acute nursing room, and so keep her in your thoughts and prayers, please. So in our church here, it's a custom of ours to offer visitors and newcomers a chance to introduce themselves if they feel comfortable doing so. If it's your first, second, or even third time here, we invite you to stand as you're able. Perhaps raise your hand. We'd like for you to tell us who you are and where you are from. Are there any visitors or newcomers here today who would like to introduce themselves? Hi.
Hi, my name is Angela Hamilton. I've lived in Corpus for a year, originally from Indiana.
Hi, Angela. Welcome. Hi. Hi, Judy. Welcome. Anybody else? Well, we're very glad you're here. Join us for coffee and conversation after the service. We want to get to know you. So Dave Miller, please come up.
This is my first time here, so first of all, a very personal comment. I'm becoming an expert on how to book flights. Becoming an expert. I've already had some expertise from other people here. Thank you very much. So if you'd like to learn from me, and I'd like to learn from you, please help me. The less personal but very enthusiastic comment is a pleasure that you are here. Steve Brooks, I'm sorry. We've been trying to reconstruct how we met. Grace and I are RVers, as some of you are, many of you perhaps, and we went, I only have 30 seconds and I'm over it now. We were in Colorado, we think, at that point, but we're not quite sure, but we think now we've established that in Carbondale we first encountered this man. I think doing Pete Seeger at that point. Probably, yeah. Well, my memory's fading. His is better. The second time we met him was, we think, in New Mexico, and when he did a thing not on Pete Seeger, but a wonderful sermon also on paganism. And as a UU, I'd heard about them, but I got to know them better, and it was a good show. So we got in touch with him, and he's here. God bless him. And you're going to enjoy yourselves, and we're getting a little thin during the summer, but you all sing lustily, and I think you're going to enjoy singing here. This is Steve Brooks. I'm getting old.
Thank you, Dave. After, please know that in the foyer there's some CDs for sale, so be sure and grab a handful. We will now enter into a time of worship.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you, Joe. Good morning. Unitarian Universalist congregations begin their services by lighting a chalice, a symbol of our faith. And now, somebody who I have not identified but I know is in this room will light the chalice. Today's service is a celebration of one of America's musical heroes who passed away 4 years ago at the age of 94, Pete Seeger. Besides being a godfather to generations of folk singers and social activists, Pete was a longtime member of the Community Unitarian Church in New York City. His life and his music always promoted human dignity and the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And it's no accident that his best-known singing group embodied our seventh principle, the interdependent web. It was called the Weavers. Throughout this service, I will invite you to lift your voice in song as we weave the interdependent web of Pete Seeger.
Would you please rise as you're willing and able? We're going to recite the covenant and remain standing after for this first song. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with each other and with all we hold sacred.
When
Please be seated. Now we'd like to invite up the young and the young at heart to sit on the story quilt. Steve has a song.
And you don't have to be up on the story quilt to sing along with this song. This is a much happier song than the one that we just sung. Although it does have a tragic ending, I'll do the spoiler alert right here. So, can anyone tell me what is folk music? What is a folk song? What's a folk song? You look like you have an answer? No? What's a folk song? Well, a folk song is a song that was made up by folks. Yeah. I know you come to church every Sunday to get stunning insights like that. It was made up by people like you and me. The classic folk songs are songs where we don't know who first made them up, who first wrote the words or the music, because whoever made them up taught it to someone else, who changed a little bit and taught it to someone else. And some of these songs have been handed down like that for hundreds of years. And the song we're going to sing right now is one of those songs. This song has been traced back more than 500 years. Back in the days when Queen Elizabeth I was the Queen of England, the story goes that there was a prince from France who came across the English Channel to court the Queen. He wanted to marry the Queen. You may or may not know that Queen Elizabeth never did get married. But the English, a lot of English people were none too happy that a prince from France was coming over to try and marry their queen. And in those days, and still in these days, sometimes they called the French by the derogatory name of frogs. And so, the original version of the song Froggy Went A-Courtin' was written. The words have been found more than 500 years old. But over time, it kind of got separated from the queen and the prince, and the animals became more like real critters. So, when I sing the words then y'all are going to sing back at me, And at the end of the verse, we'll all sing together. It's a Bruce Springsteen kind of thing. I'm sure that's where he got it. So, Froggy went a-courtin' and he did right, Froggy went a-courtin' and he did right, Froggy went a-courtin' and he did right, sword and a pistol by his side, He went down to Missy Mousie's door, Went down to Missy Mousie's door, Went down to Missy Mousie's door where he had been many times before, He took Missy Mousie upon his knee, He took Missy Mousie upon his knee, He took Missy Mousie upon his knee and he said, Ribbit, 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 Miss Mouse wants to marry me. Now this time, instead of saying we're going to say Without my Uncle Rat's consent, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, Without my Uncle Rat's consent, I wouldn't marry the president. Well, now we're going to get positive again. Well, Uncle Rat laughed and shook his fat sides. Uncle Rat laughed and shook his fat sides. Uncle Rat laughed and and shook his fat side to think his niece would be upright. Well, now it's time to start planning for the wedding, which means I've got to hire a catering service, one that specializes in interspecies kinds of weddings. Where will the wedding breakfast be? Where will the wedding breakfast be? Where will the wedding breakfast be? Way down yonder in a holler tree. They didn't have much of a budget for the reception, I'm afraid. What will the wedding breakfast be? What will the wedding breakfast be? What will the wedding breakfast be? 3 green beans and a black-eyed pea. Well, now it's time for that spoiler alert that I warned you about. You see, despite the frog and the mouse and all their guests having the best intentions to live happily ever after, the wedding got crashed by a species that was not invited, and it ended tragically. They all went sailing across the lake. They all went sailing across the lake. They all went sailing across the lake, and they got swallowed up by a big black snake. Froggy went a-courting and he did right. Froggy went a-courting and he did right. Froggy went a-courting and he did right. A sword and a pistol by his side.
We,
And now let us sing the children out.
Yes, help me sing the children out, okay?
Go now in peace.
Go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Our church community is given life through the contributions of its members and friends. In addition to generously offering our time and talents, monetary contributions are just as necessary to sustain us. It's just one more way we show our care and concern for each other and our community. The offering will now be given and gratefully received.
And this is a Pete Seeger song that's not as well known as some of the others that we're singing this morning, but it's got quite a story behind it. Pete Seeger wrote this song back around 1967 at the height of the Vietnam War, and performed it on the national TV variety show, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, September of '67. And before the show aired, the censors got a hold of it and cut this song out of the show. There was such an outcry over the censorship that 4 months later they brought Pete Seeger back onto the Smothers Brothers, and he got to perform this song, and the nation got to hear it this time. Sadly, the song is just as relevant this weekend as it was 50 years ago. It's called Waist Deep in the Big Muddy. It was back in 1942. I was a member of a good platoon. We was on maneuvers in Louisiana one night by the light of the moon. Captain told us to ford that river. That's how it all begun. We were knee deep in the big muddy, and the big fool said to push on.
push on. Sergeant said, sir, are you sure this is the best way back to the base? Captain said, I followed this river just a mile above this place. It'll get a little soggy, but just keep slogging. We'll soon be on dry ground. We were waist deep in the big muddy, and the big fool said, push on, push on. Sergeant said, sir, with all this equipment, no man will be able to swim. Sergeant, don't be a nervous Nelly, the captain said to him. Just need a little determination. Follow me, I'll lead on. We were neck deep in the big muddy, and the big fool said, push on, push on. All at once, the moon clouded over. We heard a gurgling cry. A few seconds later, the captain's helmet was all that floated by. Sergeant said, turn around, men. I'm in charge from now on. And we just made it out of the big muddy with the captain dead and gone. So gone. Well, we stripped him out and found his body stuck in the old quicksand. Guess he didn't know the water was deeper than the place he'd once before been. Another stream joined the big muddy half-mile from where he'd gone. We were lucky to escape from the big muddy when the big fool said to push on. Draw any moral, you can do that for yourself. Maybe you're still walking, you're still talking, you'd like to keep your health. But every day I read in the paper, that old feeling comes on that we're waist deep in the big muddy, and the big fool says push on. Waist deep in the big muddy, and the big fool says push on. Waist deep in the big muddy, and the big fool says to push on. Waist deep, neck deep, soon even a tall man will be over his head. We're waist deep in the big muddy, and the big fool said push on. Push on. Push on. Mission accomplished. Thank you.
Thanks. That was wonderful. So let's take a couple of minutes now for a time for quiet meditation. Following that, when you hear the music start, please feel free to come up and light a candle for joys and concerns if you wish.
I have two readings here. The first one is very short. It comes from a Russian novel from about World War II called And Quiet Flows the Don. This little snippet from the novel is taken from an old Cossack folk song that Pete Seeger wrote down in his notebook, and years later when he was flying to a gig, he came upon these words and started coming up with music for them. The words are, "Where are the flowers? The girls have plucked them. Where are the girls? They're all married. Where are the men? They're all in the army." And now a reading from a book that is one of my Bibles. It is the book is called The Incomplete Folksinger. It was published in the mid-'60s in a collection of writings that Pete had done about politics and folk music and everything else over the previous 20 years, a lot of them for Sing Out magazine. In 1935, a good bit of song collecting was being done under the auspices of different government agencies, such as the Resettlement Administration. Such work was called boondoggling at the time, but through the work of these agencies, the famous Library of Congress collection was first built up. My father, as an expert in several branches of musical scholarship, was involved in these projects. And I accompanied him on one field trip to North Carolina. We wound down through the narrow valleys with so many turns in the road that I got seasick. We passed wretched little cabins with half-naked children peering out the door. We passed exhibits of patchwork quilts and other handicrafts that often were the main source of income. I first became acquainted with a side of America that I had never known. At the Asheville Square Dance and Ballad Festival, I fell in love with the old-fashioned five-string banjo, rippling out a rhythm to one fascinating song after another. I liked the rhythms. I liked the melodies, time-tested by generations of singers. I liked the words. Compared to the trivialities of the popular songs, my brother and I formerly harmonized. The words of these songs had all the meat of human life in them. They sang of heroes, outlaws, murderers, fools, that weren't afraid of being scandalous instead of giggly or cute. Above all, they seemed frank, straightforward, honest. By comparison, it seemed to me that too many art songs were concerned with being elegant and too many pop songs were concerned with being clever. In 1935, I tried learning some of this style of music. 37 years later, I'm still learning. I have found that some of the simplest music is some of the most difficult to do. But after 25 years, I think I have finally learned to play Old Joe Clark halfway to my own satisfaction. And now I will move into my own voice. I'd let you know that when I was 15, I learned to play guitar from Pete Seeger. At the time, Pete was not aware that he had a new student. I was sitting in a living room back home in Pennsylvania, plucking along with a record called The Folksingers Guitar Guide. Once he taught me to move my fingers smoothly from a D chord to a G and an A7, which took a good month, I could play honest-to-goodness folk songs like I've Been Working on the Railroad. Young as I was, it was a musical point of no return. I knew which side I was on. I soon moved on to other records, but in my mind's ear, I can still hear Pete singing, "You get a line and I'll get a pole, and we'll go down to the crawdad hole, honey, baby mine." Thus did Pete Seeger enter the soundtrack of my life. Mine is hardly the only life that has danced to his clawhammer beat. Pete wrote a large part of the soundtrack for the 60s. From Peter, Paul, and Mary singing "If I Had a Hammer," to the Byrds jangling their way through Turn, 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 to the theme song of the Civil Rights Movement, "We Shall Overcome." America marched, protested, prayed, and dreamed to songs that Pete had a hand in creating. 4 decades later, I heard another one of Pete's songs up the road from the George W. Bush Ranch in Crawford, Texas. That night, a silver-haired Joan Baez was singing to families who had lost members on the battlefield in Iraq, and they were singing back to her, "Where have all the flowers gone?" I confess that I used to think that song was unbearably corny. Back when I was a teenager in the 70s, the Vietnam War was over, and I had no conception that future generations could possibly make the same tragic mistakes all over again. Pete knew better. He summed it up in 5 haunting words: when will they ever learn? It's no accident that Pete should have been singing about flowers. In the early days of Sing Out magazine, he wrote a column called Johnny Appleseed Jr. His 7 decades as a musical missionary fertilized a broad acreage of American culture, from the 1930s up until 2014, when he played his final note at the ripe old age of 94. But the music of Pete Seeger, as deeply as is imprinted on our American souls, was only one strand in an interdependent web, woven together with history, peace, politics, and spirit. And this morning, in the next few minutes, I would like to draw out for you a few of those strands and share with you some of the things that I have learned from Pete as a musician and as a citizen of America and of the world. When I start telling stories about Pete Seeger, I could go on for a long time. As long as one of those British ballads that Francis Child collected back in the 1880s. That was the period when the whole concept of folk music was being born. England was a century into its Industrial Revolution, and traditional songs of the countryside were finally being preserved on paper before they could go extinct and pass out of memory. The movement soon spread to America, as folklorists like John Lomax of Texas went gathering songs in Appalachian hollers and Deep South prison farms and Old West cowboy camps. What they discovered was not just isolated songs, but a process. They called it the folk process. A ballad like Barbara Allen or Froggy Went A-Courtin' had crossed the ocean and evolved into a bewildering array of forms, each mutation the work of many anonymous songsters. Explained Pete, maybe we should say that folk music is not so much any particular group of songs or singers, but rather it is a process, an age-old process of ordinary people making their own music, reshaping old traditions to fit new situations. Here in America, the nation of immigrants, the folk process went into overdrive. Alien traditions collided to produce marvelous musical hybrids. West African songs evolved into blues, which crossbred with the offspring of Scotch-Irish ballads to give us country music. Pete himself grew up straddling 2 distinct musical traditions. His stepmother, Ruth, was a classical composer, while his father, Charles, was a musicologist and folk song collector. On one of his dad's excursions to Asheville, North Carolina in 1935, Pete had a life-changing experience. As we have heard, he heard his first 5-string banjo. He ended up dropping out of Harvard, working in the Archive of American Folk Song at the Library of Congress, and hopping freight trains west with a folk songwriter named Woody Guthrie. Woody was the folk process come to life. He was taking old songs and he was turning them into new ones, retrofitting well-worn melodies with lyrics about current events. And his point of view was always from the bottom, looking up. From Dust Bowl tales of his native Oklahoma to strikes and labor massacres. As the two sang in migrant camps and union halls, Pete learned that music and politics were a continuum. the folk process was not just an academic exercise, it was a tool for helping working people to organize. Singing together could lift their spirits at the same time that it stiffened their spines. And the art of the sing-along became a trademark of every Pete Seeger concert. Wrote Pete, "It is only within recent human history that such emphasis has been put upon professional solo singers. In primitive tribes, all songs, except for the long narratives, were sung by everyone. If a song had a chorus, everyone in the audience naturally sang it. If we really love folk music, we will get audiences singing with us." A decade later, after Pete came home from World War II, he found a new mission for folk music. Radio and TV had begun their relentless push to homogenize American culture. Folk music offered a way to push back. It was a do-it-yourself ethic that encouraged people to turn off the tube, pull out their guitars, and relearn the art of entertaining one another. On a less conscious level, the old songs were connecting gray flannel suburbanites with the struggles of their ancestors, who had shed so much blood to win luxuries like the 40-hour week and the 8-hour day. Wrote Pete, "Somehow, somewhere along the line, Americans must learn, as our grandparents knew, that it is fun to create for yourself. Ultimately, rank and file participation in music goes hand in hand with creativity on other planes, arts, sciences, and yes, even politics." In 1948, with Ronnie Gilbert, Lee Hayes, and Fred Hellerman, Pete formed a quartet called the Weavers. For the first time, they put folk music classics onto the popular music charts. Their biggest record spent 13 weeks at #1, "Goodnight Irene," which they learned from the East Texas blues singer Leadbelly. Sadly, the Weavers were soon caught up in the witch hunts of the Joe McCarthy era. Pete had sung for the Communist Party 20 years earlier, and he was hauled before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Unlike some of his colleagues, he refused to name names. Instead, he testified, "I have sung for Americans of every political persuasion, and I am proud that I never refused to sing for an audience, no matter what religion or color of their skin or situation in life. I have sung in hobo jungles, and I have sung for the Rockefellers." The committee was unimpressed. Pete was charged with contempt of Congress, and he left the Weavers. For the rest of the 50s, he was blacklisted from national TV and radio. But he eked out a living playing college campuses and Unitarian churches, and he kept right on scattering seeds. The soil appeared rocky, but in a few short years, the folk music scene was looking like springtime in Texas. Peter, Paul, and Mary, a group inspired directly by the Weavers, made the top 10 in 1962 with "If I Had a Hammer." That same year, an appeals court overturned Pete's conviction. Succeeding 5 decades were no less eventful. Pete championed young songwriters like Bob Dylan and Arlo Guthrie. He helped clean up his native Hudson River, sailing the sloop Clearwater to concerts and teach-ins up and down its banks. By the 1990s, the prophet was finally being honored in his own country, winning Grammy Awards, the National Medal of Arts, and even being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Along the way, he kept on performing. When there was a peace protest, civil rights march, or an environmental rally, you could count on Pete to sing his part. It was at one of those rallies back in 1980 that I got to sing on stage with Pete. Back home in Pennsylvania, it was the first anniversary of the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. I had worked hard to get Pete to that rally, and backstage, I wangled myself an introduction. His ears perked up when I told him that I had written some 3 Mile Island verses to "This Land Is Your Land," and he insisted on writing them down. Later on, as he was wrapping up his set, he launched into "This Land," and then he called me up on stage to lead a sing-along, with 13,000 voices joining in. One of those voices was a backup singer named Linda Ronstadt. It was 1999 before I had another run-in with Pete. By then, I was writing songs for Jim Hightower's political talk show on national radio. Every week, I was composing a new song about something in the news. And naturally, I got to thinking a lot about Pete. When I found out that his birthday was actually the day after mine, I took a break from writing snarky songs about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And I composed a ballad called The Weaver. What I didn't know was that Hightower and Pete, unsurprisingly, were old friends. As I prepared to sing the song on the air, I was stunned to hear Pete's unmistakable high-pitched voice coming over the headphones. Now, Pete had always had a streak of the cantankerous Yankee in him, and he was never comfortable with the cult of St. Pete. But he reluctantly stayed on the line, and he gave the song a listen. And I guess he ended up being touched, because he asked me to send him a copy. And before I melted into a puddle on the stage, I promised I would. That was 18 years ago. Today, it's hard to imagine a world without Pete. It seemed at times like he would be singing out with us forever. He was 14 years older than Willie Nelson. Still, he climbed on stage several times a year. Just 4 months before his passing, he was at Farm Aid, sharing the mic with Neil Young and Dave Matthews on a sing-along of This Land Is Your Land. And he added a new verse about fracking. A few days before his death, he was out behind his cabin that overlooked his beloved Hudson River, chopping wood. As fine an epitaph as any would be some words he wrote about himself back in 1960, in the golden days of the folk music revival, or as Pete liked to call it, the Great Folk Music Scare. As a performer, yours truly does not have much of a voice, and there are plenty of young people that can play Rings Around Me on a guitar or banjo. But I'm proud that I've hardly ever met an audience that I couldn't get singing. I figure my main function in life is that of a sort of catalyst, bringing some good people together with some good songs. When it comes to those songs, no one would doubt that Pete is still with us, and that we'll be singing him out for as long as there are wrongs to right and voices to raise. So Pete, to answer your question about the flowers, they have gone all over this land. The folk process that you handed down to us is alive and well and cross-pollinating, and not just on stages and CDs, but around campfires. New generations are writing fresh lyrics to old tunes, and they're sharing them around the virtual campfires of the internet. I'm sad to say that young men are still marching off to war, and that now there are young girls marching beside them. But there is still a time for peace. And Pete, as you reminded us, it's never too late. Now let me invite you to rise, embody your spirit, and join in our closing song, If I Had a Hammer.
Evening,
Please remain standing for some closing words that come from Pete himself. If you love a song, you can make it your own by singing it. Through the years, it will become part of your life. Probably you will change the tune in subtle ways, little by little, or add or subtract verses. You'll find that after you have sung a song over and over, lived with it over a space of weeks or months, then you really know what you want to do with it. You'll know how you want to sing it. Over a period of years, you'll get better at it until the song is literally a part of yourself. And that's what folk music should be. Go now in peace. Amen and blessed be.